The hot, humid Manila morning weighed heavy over the imposing regional trial court building. Palm trees swayed gently outside, while the frenetic movement of Filipino streets contrasted with the solemn atmosphere inside. It was an ordinary Thursday in March, but something extraordinary was about to happen in courtroom number 3. Manny Pacquiao, the legendary Filipino boxer, quietly adjusted his tie while waiting in the corridor. Dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, he seemed uncomfortable with the judicial environment's formality. His hands, which had won 8 world titles in different weight categories, now nervously held a folder with documents. He was there as a witness in a fraud case involving a charitable organization that supported underprivileged children in Mindanao. The defense attorney, Dr. Isabella Santos, was known throughout the country for her sharp tongue and aggressive courtroom tactics. With her impeccable suits and intimidating posture, she had built a reputation for destroying witnesses on the stand. Her calculating eyes had already identified Pacquiao as her next target, preparing to question his credibility. The bell rang, announcing the beginning of the session. The heavy wooden doors opened, revealing the courtroom with its austere furniture and the Philippine flag in the background. The judge, a middle-aged man with thick-framed glasses, took his elevated position. The lawyers positioned themselves, and Manny was called to the witness stand. As the boxer walked slowly to his position, the murmurs in the room ceased. There was something vulnerable about the way he moved in that unfamiliar environment, so different from the rings where he reigned supreme. Dr. Santos watched every movement, an almost imperceptible smile crossing her lips. She didn't know she was about to learn a lesson that would change her perspective forever. The interrogation began formally, with basic questions about Manny's identity and involvement with a charitable institution. The boxer answered calmly, his soft voice echoing through the silent room. He explained how he had learned about the organization's work during one of his visits to the poorest communities in Mindanao, where he had grown up facing similar privations. Dr. Santos circled the space like a predator studying its prey. She noticed Manny's provincial accent, the simple way he constructed his sentences, the nervousness in his gestures. To her, he represented everything she despised, someone without formal education who had achieved fame through brute force. Her strategy was clear: discredit the world champion by making him appear ignorant and unreliable. The questions became progressively more complex and loaded with legal terms. The lawyer questioned specific dates, exact amounts, administrative procedures that were clearly beyond the athlete's everyday knowledge. Manny tried to answer as best he could, but his discomfort with technical language and legal subtleties was evident. The crucial moment came when Dr. Santos, with a condescending tone, began questioning Manny's intellectual capacity to understand the organization's financial documents. She insinuated that someone who had dropped out of school to become a boxer could hardly understand complex accounting matters. Her comments, though technically within professional bounds, carried subtle venom. Manny's face remained serene, but his eyes revealed a mixture of hurt and determination. He had faced much more intimidating opponents in rings around the world, but this type of attack was different. The lawyer was targeting not his physical strength, but his dignity, his story of overcoming adversity, everything he represented to millions of Filipinos who, like him, had been born into poverty. Dr. Santos intensified her attacks, suggesting that Manny was just a celebrity being used to give credibility to a corrupt organization. She questioned whether he really understood the reports he claimed to have reviewed, whether his signature on documents wasn't just an empty formality. Each word was chosen to diminish, to subtly humiliate. The audience in the courtroom began to shift uncomfortably. Many knew Manny's story, the boy who sold bread and cigarettes on the streets of General Santos City, who slept on cardboard on sidewalks, who found in boxing an escape from misery. Seeing their national hero being treated this way generated palpable tension in the air. It was then that the lawyer made her fatal mistake. In a moment of arrogance, she sarcastically asked if Manny could explain the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement, adding that perhaps such concepts were too complicated for someone whose education was limited to counting rounds in a fight. The silence that followed was deafening. Manny lowered his head for a moment, his hands clasped on the podium. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not anger, not resentment, but deep compassion mixed with unshakable inner strength. With a calm and measured voice, Manny began to respond. He didn't speak about balance sheets or statements, but about the children he met in Manila's slums, about the hopeful faces in the orphanages he visited, about the mothers who cried while thanking him for the help his donations provided. He described the schools built, the meals served, the dreams nurtured through this organization that was now being questioned. Manny continued, explaining that perhaps he didn't know all the technical accounting terms, but he knew the value of every peso donated. He knew how many children could be fed with each contribution, how many school uniforms could be bought, how many teachers could be hired. His mathematics didn't come from books, but from the experience of someone who had gone hungry, who had walked barefoot to school. He shared how, after each fight, he mentally calculated how much of his purse could be allocated to social causes, how he personally visited communities to ensure the money reached its correct destination, how he knew many of the benefited children by name, following their school progress and celebrating their small victories. Manny's voice gained strength when he spoke about education. Yes, he had left school early, but that only increased his commitment to ensuring other children wouldn't have to make the same choice. He had completed his high school education at 27, while already a world champion, studying between training sessions and fights, not out of necessity, but to show Filipino children that it's never too late to learn. Dr. Santos remained motionless, her confident expression gradually dissolving. She had prepared counter-arguments for technical defenses, for elaborate justifications, but not for this raw display of humanity. Manny's simple words carried a truth that transcended any legal rhetoric. The boxer concluded by saying he understood the lawyer's work, that she was just fulfilling her professional role. But he added that beyond laws and regulations, there were human values that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets. The true measure of that organization's success wasn't in the numbers, but in the smiles of children who now had hope, in the families who found support, in the communities that grew stronger. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the judge, accustomed to maintaining his impartiality, seemed visibly moved. Those present had witnessed something rare, a moment when simplicity defeated sophistication, when sincerity overcame strategy, when the heart spoke louder than the mind. Dr. Santos looked at her papers, then at Manny, and again at her papers. Her hands trembled slightly. Her entire career had been built on the premise that intelligence and formal education were the definitive measures of a person's worth. In a few minutes, a man she had completely underestimated had demolished that conviction. She slowly approached the witness stand, her high heels echoing in the silence. When she spoke, her voice had lost all its previous arrogance. With genuine humility, she apologized to Manny for her disrespectful insinuations. She acknowledged that she had allowed her prejudices to blind her to the true nature of the man before her. Manny responded with a gentle smile, the same one that had won millions of fans around the world. He extended his hand to the lawyer, a gesture of reconciliation that transcended the formalities of the court. In that moment, they were no longer adversaries in a legal process, but two human beings recognizing each other's dignity. The judge, visibly impacted by the scene, declared a brief recess. As people began to move, many approached Manny to shake his hand or simply express their respect. Dr. Santos remained in her place, processing what had happened. She had entered that room as one of the most feared lawyers in the country, and now felt like a student who had just received the most important lesson of her life. During the recess, something unexpected happened. Dr. Santos approached Manny in the courthouse corridor. Her walk no longer had the predatory confidence of before, but an almost timid hesitation. She asked for a few minutes of private conversation, and Manny, with his characteristic generosity, promptly agreed. In a small meeting room, the lawyer shared her own story. Daughter of a domestic worker and a jeepney driver, she had grown up in Tonda, one of Manila's poorest neighborhoods. Her obsession with academic excellence had been born from a desperate desire to escape poverty, to prove her worth in a world that constantly diminished her because of her origins. Every certificate, every award, every courtroom victory had been armor against the prejudice she faced. But in this process, she had distanced herself from her roots, developing her own prejudices against those who reminded her of her past. In Manny, she had seen a reflection of what she had tried to leave behind, and this had awakened a cruel defensiveness. Manny listened attentively, his eyes full of understanding. He shared how he had also struggled with similar feelings early in his career, how success sometimes created a painful distance from the people and places that had shaped him. But he had learned that denying his origins was denying the very essence of who he was. The two talked about the unique pressures of being successful Filipinos, about the responsibility they felt toward their communities, about the delicate balance between personal ambition and social responsibility. It was a conversation that transcended their professional differences, connecting them through shared experiences that few could fully understand. When the session resumed, there was a different energy in the room. Dr. Santos stood up and, to everyone's surprise, requested the judge's permission to make a statement. With a clear and determined voice, she publicly acknowledged her inappropriate behavior and asked that her previous questions be stricken from the official record. More than that, she declared that after hearing Manny's testimony, she was convinced of the integrity of the charitable organization in question. Her preliminary investigation, she said, had been influenced by prejudices she now recognized and was ashamed of. She requested additional time to re-evaluate the case with a fairer and more impartial perspective. The public prosecutor, clearly surprised by the turnaround, agreed with the request. The judge, demonstrating wisdom, granted a 2-week adjournment for both parties to re-examine the evidence. But before closing the session, he made a point of thanking Manny for his testimony, noting that it had been one of the most powerful demonstrations of integrity he had witnessed in his 20 years on the bench. As people began to leave the room, something remarkable happened. One by one, lawyers, court officials, and members of the public approached Manny not as boxing fans, but as proud Filipinos. Many briefly shared their own stories of overcoming adversity, creating a chain of solidarity that transformed the formal courtroom environment into something deeply human. Dr. Santos watched from afar, her heart heavy with the understanding of how much she had lost in her journey to the top. But there was also hope, the possibility of rebuilding her legal practice on more solid, more human, more true foundations to her own origins and values. 2 weeks later, the case was officially closed. The additional investigation had confirmed the charitable organization's integrity, and all charges were dropped. But the impact of that day in court reverberated far beyond legal documents and judicial decisions. Dr. Isabella Santos transformed her legal practice. She began accepting pro bono cases for underprivileged communities, using her skills to defend those who couldn't afford legal representation. Her reputation changed, from feared lawyer to respected defender of the rights of the less privileged. In interviews, she credited Manny Pacquiao with showing her that true strength wasn't in tearing others down, but in lifting them up. Manny continued his philanthropic work with renewed vigor. The publicity from the case had brought more attention and support to the charitable organization, allowing for the expansion of its educational programs. He also initiated a series of lectures at law schools, sharing his experience about the importance of empathy and true justice in the legal system. Months later, at a charity event in Manila, Manny and Isabella met again. This time, not as adversaries in a courtroom, but as partners in a common mission. Together, they announced the creation of a scholarship program for law students from underprivileged communities, ensuring that the next generation of Filipino lawyers would never forget their roots or the greater purpose of their profession. The story of that day in court became a kind of legend in Filipino legal circles. Law professors used it as an example that true justice transcends procedures and technicalities. But for Manny Pacquiao, it had been just another fight, not with his fists, but with his heart. And as in all his great battles, he had won not by knockout, but by unanimous decision. The decision to choose compassion over confrontation, dignity over destruction, and truth over strategy. The sun was setting over Manila on that memorable day, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. In the city streets, people went about their daily lives, many unaware of the small revolution that had occurred in a courtroom. But for those who were present, for those who heard the story, there remained the certainty that sometimes the greatest champions are not those who win in the ring, but those who win in life, transforming adversaries into allies and prejudices into bridges of understanding. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.